Welcome to Stand in Your Truth, episode 5. I'm here with Sehaam Cyrene. Welcome.
Thank you, Kerry.
Would you like to introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I am the founder of Better Conversations. I work with leaders in organisations to improve their presence, their conversation skills, their leadership overall, culture. This year has been kind of a big year in terms of developing the business. I put brought to life really a course that has been long in my mind called Leaders Who Coach, which is taking all the skills that I learned as a certified professional coach to leadership and fuse my own experience in leadership has informed a great deal of how the course has taken shape. So that's my hope, is that if I can extend some of the skills that I have now as a coach to other leaders, then I think I can make a good contribution to society and work.
Yeah, and today we're going to be speaking about having courageous conversations, which is an amazing topic. We met when I was doing some work for you, some scripts for you. And as soon as I found out what you did, I was just absolutely sold, because I just thought, wow, everybody needs to know this information. If we can all have those skills to have better conversations, it's just really transformative in business, in our relationships, in our family. It sort of translates to every sphere of our lives, really.
Yes, yeah, for sure. It certainly does. It certainly does, and that's the goal. When we met, you took my sort of a lot of my wordiness and created something quite wonderful, which I'm using in the podcasts. So brilliant scripts, and it's nice to have that have your perspective on it, because it was an external view. And look on the whole thing. So incredibly valuable.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about how you actually got to discover, your own truth as to how you want to encourage leaders to have better conversations.
Yeah, it's a journey of discovery, going from a place of joining the workforce, not really knowing how I fitted in, what how to operate an environment. I felt very much a fish out of water, like there were rules that I wasn't privy to. I didn't really get it. And that, in combination with working with other people who I think also didn't get it, didn't have the skills, didn't have the management and people skills, meant that, and perhaps something, other people can relate to, is just not having a very good boss, and the impact that has. It's like going to school, having your favorite subject, but a teacher who you just don't get on with for whatever reason, and that spoils the subject for you. It kills the passion that you have for that subject. It's exactly the same at work. So I also discovered, as I progressed in my career and took on leadership roles, I discovered that I really thrived off seeing other people grow. I thrived off their development. That's where I drew my energy, was in that space very, very strongly. I loved the work that I did, but it was the people around me and the team, us making things happen, but also seeing them achieve things that no one before or they didn't think that they could do. So always quite remarkable.
And was there a specific moment where you thought, we need to transform the way that we look at conversations?
More of a gradual growing awareness, I think. Like any idea, I think it takes time sitting with it and playing with it and trying to express it in different ways. It's like that elevator pitch, right? it's only by the process of putting it out there, trying it, and figuring out what's resonating with people, what's the best way for me to express it. And so that certainly has been a journey of years, and that's normal, and that's not. But equally, that's not something as a youngster anyone told me that, you know, it's a journey. There's a growth path here. I have had some great people who've held spaces for me, and those have always left a massive impression on me and influenced me to be bigger or better than I thought I could, because, you know, and what they did wasn't remarkable. It wasn't rocket science. They just created space and showed that they believed in you and your capability, showed that they valued me and what I was bringing, and that goes an incredibly long way. That fuels you for quite some way, right? Until you hopefully meet the next person and so on.
Yeah, so it seems like you had some key sort of inspirational figures when it came to those courageous conversations. What would you say like the components of a really good courageous conversation are?
Number one is to prepare for it. And ideally, both you and the other person you need to have the conversation with, to prepare for it. I think we often just find ourselves in a state of panic or anxiety about having to have the conversation, which the emotional feeling that we have is important to listen to, but we have to learn to engage our brains in a way that actually is helpful for us, rather than letting our emotional charge take over and dominate. So preparation can give us that, you know, being able to see it express what is it that I need to express, and see it from the other person's perspective as well. And then it's thinking about it in terms of you know, self-advocating, saying what it is that is of concern to you, trying to be as neutral and factual as possible, and then really handing that over to the other person to speak and voice their opinion. And the importance of doing that, rather than feeling like, okay, I've got to tell you all these things and I need to get it all off my chest and you're going to listen to it, is we haven't invested in the time to emotionally connect with the other person. No one is going to listen to us if they're angry with us. They've got their, you know, the barriers are up. And so our job, if we're wanting to have that courageous conversation, or we think that's important to have, then we have to own the whole of it, which is, you know, preparing, getting the person in the right state of mind, giving them a chance to speak, listening to them, and being really wanting to understand, you know, what, you know, where are the knots in all of this, and that gives our brain something to do and quietens the emotional charge that's going on in our bodies. And through that, you can have the most rich and wonderful conversations, even if you're talking about something quite difficult, you know, or having to give difficult feedback to somebody. It's just planning for it. There is a flow to the conversation. It's worth planning for.
What I found really interesting, what you said there, is about taking that emotional charge out of it. Because I imagine, especially if you're working with people, you're in a boardroom, there's something that people are particularly passionate about, or they've got a particular opinion about, they can get emotionally charged up. How important is it for us to have that sort of emotional regulation when coming to have a difficult conversation with someone?
I think it's very important, and it's a really interesting point that you highlight. It's really important because, especially if you are generally, but especially if you're in a management or supervisory or leadership role, it's really important because you set the tone for the rest of the conversation. And it's very hard to have a rational conversation or an unbiased conversation or to be able to hear the other person if our emotions are screaming in that space. And physiologically, the cortisol goes up, so our stress levels go up. Our brain can't function when it's flooded in that way, and so the emotional regulation is about containing that part of it, that stress, and amplifying the good emotional feelings, the connection, the feeling that I have with you. Because that's where things get resolved. That's where we can problem solve. That's where we can even reach a point of going, well, we do have different points of view, and I'd love us to have had, to be aligned, but maybe it's just one of those things where we won't agree, or let's this is the start of a conversation. I've really understood you a lot better. Maybe we can revisit it, and maybe we both need to sleep on it for a day or two and come back to it. And that's a far healthier way. I think there's a certain amount of pressure that comes into conversations that you need to resolve it now in this singular conversation. And when we put ourselves under that kind of pressure, added with the any emotional triggers we feel, it's not a great place. It's a really unhappy, unsatisfying place to be.
Yeah, because you can get to a certain level with one conversation and then, like you say, revisit it once you've had some time to sort of reflect, not just what on the person said, but then on how you handled that particular conversation as well.
Yeah.
In your work with clients, what's the sort of number one thing that most people struggle with, would you say, when it comes to having better conversations?
The difficult conversations, the relationships where I don't like the person I have to work with, or we're not seeing eye to eye. Those are the things that worry people the most, is being able to voice their opinion. And that can be anything from just, I have a different perspective from the rest of my teammates, through to a decision-making meeting. Just being able to express ourselves. We have really great thoughts. And when I talk to people and we start to explore, what is it, what's going on for you? What are the thoughts that you're having? They're incredibly articulate. And, but there's a nervousness about saying that in the moment. And that's partly to do with nerves, partly to do with, the power dynamics that are going on in the room and whether you feel it's the right thing to say. But there's a hesitation, and yet what they actually express is completely valid and fair. It's, they express things in terms and in very balanced ways, but we get sort of this anxiety kind of kicks in, and we freeze and become paralyzed about what we want to say. But typically people are just wanting to say, I have a different opinion, and are you willing to hear it? What we lack is the language that helps us kind of overcome that sense of paralysis. So some of what I do with clients is around role playing and practicing and trying things on for size, so that it doesn't feel quite so scary. It starts to feel familiar. It starts to sit comfortably. They find their own language and words for it. And just developing those sorts of techniques, or just even 2 or 3 phrases, can be incredibly empowering in conversations, because it allows us to just start that piece of, I have a different opinion. So yeah, I'd say that's it. And then obviously all sorts of scenarios sit behind that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned language, because I feel that language is just a key tool to better conversations. I mean, if we can frame something in a certain way, it's, we can have all the good intentions in the world, but then if it comes out wrong, it's likely going to not be a healthy or productive conversation. So could you give us some examples of some of the languages that people use, some of the different phrases perhaps, that, sort of pave the way for better conversations?
Yeah. One thing that's really important to use is to use your conversation partner's language and phrases. So number one, because that, again, it has a physiological impact on us in that we relax, we feel comfortable, it feels familiar, that we feel like there's a connection. That's a very simple way to do it. And I will share some phrases. There's one other thing that we tend to do in conversations, and we throw in hand grenades. So when we disagree with someone or we have a different perspective, we'll throw something in that we know is going to trigger the other person emotionally. And that's an act of self-sabotage, just so we're clear. No one wins. No one wins. You might get the immediate sort of dopamine hit of, I got to say my piece. It doesn't work. It never works. And I've seen it. I've been in mediation, and people throw those in, and they just destroy any opportunity at building relationships. So language is really important in terms of how clean it is, how friendly it is, how inviting it is. And then in terms of phrases, we can use things like, I have a perspective on that, but I'd love to hear yours. Things that invite people to express and talk more are going to build the trust between you, and the tide will turn eventually, that they're kind of going, well, what are your thoughts on that? And then you've got permission to share, and they're willing to listen and hear you. But anything that keeps it open questions. So how, why, those sorts of questions that invite us to think more deeply rather than closed questions. Other phrases that are really helpful are, how did you come to that decision, or how did you reach that idea? In the same way that you're asking me questions, right? How did what led me to here? Those are brilliant questions. Those are brilliant ways of getting the other person to talk and feel invited and welcome in the conversation. So yeah, anything that does that, that puts people at ease, shows that you're interested genuinely in my perspective, is a great start.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely key. And I think what you said there about listening and making sure the other person feels that you're listening is critical, right? Because sometimes we come with an agenda, we come to that meeting or we come to that conversation with all the things that we want to say, and maybe it's got that little bit of emotional charge, but we've sort of, worked on ourselves enough to sort of be able to deliver that in a calm way.
Yeah.
But we still got our own perspective that we desperately want the other person to sort of get on board with. So how can we show somebody that we're sort of actively listening?
Well, eye contact is really important. A little bit challenging. I know lots of people working remotely, eye contact translates to the green dot on your screen. It's really important that we do that. Our posture, our physical presence, both on and off screen, right, in person and on screen, shows a lot. So people can tell when you're typing. If you're, even if you're muted, that doesn't work. That makes it worse, right? Or if you're distracted and looking at something else, we have to be very conscious of where our gaze goes. But equally, we don't want to be piercing in our gaze. Other ways is our nodding and sounds. Okay, that's, go on. Yeah, please tell me more. Things that sort of keep them going. When we summarize what we've heard the other person say is also a great way of showing that we have heard them. Being careful again to use their language rather than summarize it in our own language. And then other things that can demonstrate we're listening are what questions we ask. Is there a logic to the question? Have you picked up on something that I just threw in as a side, comment? Did you actually pick up on that? And that can happen quite a lot. We're actually, we want people to know things about ourselves. And so we do have a tendency to underplay the things that are really important to us. And so they can show up as an unremarkable comment. Sorry, that's my dog. An unremarkable comment. But actually it's weighty, and it's important to acknowledge it. So when someone shares something, that's quite significant that happened in their lives, another thing we tend to do as the conversation partner is avoid it, because we don't know how to handle it. We weren't expecting it. It's actually really important for the other person that we do acknowledge it, because otherwise they wouldn't have mentioned it. If it wasn't pertinent in some way to the relationship, they wouldn't have mentioned it. And so I encourage people to acknowledge it and just say, oh wow, that sounds like it was a big deal, or that has shaped you in some way. Can I ask you more about it? So not to assume that just because they've shared it with us that they're ready to share any more. Conversations are a dance, and we assume that because someone is sitting in front of us, or we're on a call with someone, that they're ready to hear us or ready to partake in a conversation. And it's not that simple. But the more we tune into the other person and do that listening and be present and listen for, the phrases, the language they use, the hesitations, repetitions in what someone is saying, the more that we can tune into that, the more that we can actually pick up on those cues and respond effectively, and do it in a way that doesn't assume that I have the right or the permission to ask you about that big deal that happened in your life. That comes gradually. I just need you for now to know that that's a big part of who I am, and sometimes that's where we have to leave it. So listening deeply gives us all that information.
Yeah. So it seems that there's sort of like a skill there to be developed that you can teach people. Is that right? It's something that can be practiced over time, and even if you were not skillful in conversations, you can become extremely skillful.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, right? We enter into life learning from people around us, and we have our own personalities, our own experiences, our own inner critic and voice, and there are things that some people say, oh, I'm too direct in my style. I'm too, I speak my mind too much. And there's a sense that, there's an awareness that may not be helping their relationships or conversations. And also a sort of, I should stop doing that. Yes and no. There are times when actually you need to be direct, and it's important to be direct in your conversation, whether that's a family situation or a work situation. But it's learning when can you use that optimally. When are the situations that you can do that? And maybe there are some times when you need to soften it in a different scenario, because you're responding to the person in front of you, because you tuned in emotionally to the person in front of you or the sensitivity of the situation. And add another 2 or 3 little techniques that you can use that help you overcome that directness. So if our tendency is to, someone shares an opinion and we say, well, I disagree with that, I don't think that's a good idea. Having a phrase that we can lean on means that we can switch that from being, okay, tell me more about that. And so that suddenly changes the whole mood, right? That allows for a much richer conversation rather than shutting it down and disregarding it and not actually investigating something that might be really important, that might surface a risk to the work, to to an outcome. And so just being able to switch and employ that. Now, that takes practice. We've got to keep doing it. And the practice is important because we catch ourselves earlier and earlier and earlier. We're not going to pick up that skill and use it tomorrow in every situation or every appropriate situation. But the more that we become aware of it and practice and experiment with it, the more we go, oh, that worked really well in that situation. Or I started saying something you know, maybe I started saying, well, okay, well, why don't you tell me what you think about that? So we can catch ourselves earlier and earlier to the point where we, you know, that suddenly becomes our default way of actually responding to someone we disagree with. So, and, you know, you mentioned earlier, you know, language and words can come out wrong and mess up what comes next. I encourage people to experiment and to expect to mess up with using and practicing different things, and that's normal. And I do it. Everyone does it. You know, but it's okay to say, "Hang on a minute, that's not how I meant that to come out. I'm going to have another go at that." And go again. And that's you know, that shows humility. It shows you know, that we're fallible, but we really want this to be a better conversation for both of us.
Yeah. I'm interested to know how you've transformed over the course of doing this work. Have you seen your own relationships transform in every aspect?
Yes, that's an interesting one. I can look back certainly on my 20s and see all the things I did wrong that damaged my relationships with some people, and I can also see all the brilliant conversations that happened where I learned something from another person. And my own journey has been, there's a few strands to it. One is coming to an acceptance of my style of communicating. I love one-to-one conversations. I'm quieter, much quieter in a group setting. And I used to think, you know, because people tell you, well, you should speak up, and, you know, you're very softly spoken, and, you know, you need to learn to voice yourself. And all those things kind of left me feeling inadequate in the way that I was having conversations. What I've learned is that in certain situations, I can raise my tone. You know, presenting and speaking does that. I know when to take a back seat and to be really comfortable in not being the center of attention. I love dinner times with my 3 teenagers who are quite vocal, got a lot to say. And all it takes is for me to ask one question in the space of an hour and they're away. And for me, the joy, maybe as a parent, maybe you know, just watching them, I take enormous joy out of seeing them just talk. I don't need to you know, interject or, you know, own the airtime. I'm really loving just watching them, and that's translated into a lot of my relationships. I am quite happy being in the company of a lot of people and being in listening mode and just enjoying what people are sharing. So I think the confidence that both, you know, there are ways of being in a conversation that are perfectly fine and work really well. And then there are times when, yes, you know, for whatever reason, I need to ramp it up, and I've learned to do that. And so I guess that's the evolution. I've learned that, you know, there are different times and different places, and they need different bits of who we are in those conversations.
Yeah. Seems like you've come to almost like a self-acceptance of your own communication style and a confidence in that, you know, perhaps being quieter in some situations is okay. And every sort of conversational style is needed, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
what I wanted to touch upon is this current situation that we're in. Obviously, it's very stressful for a lot of people.
Mm.
A lot of us are working from home. You know,
Mm.
we're staying, you know, confined with, you know, our loved ones, and I'm sure that there's a lot of sort of tense conversations going on at the moment across the world, right? Whether it's just online with a coworker, whether it's with a partner, friend. How can we sort of have more skillful conversations when we're under stress or when there's sort of a big sort of stressor involved in our lives?
Um, well, again, it's that there's an element of preparation to all of this, right? There's an expectation that we are in, if we take the home environment, we're in close confines with each other. Many of us, you know, I don't know, certainly in my household, everyone's kind of got their corner, you know, when we are home. And we can become quite territorial about that because it's our sanctuary in a lot of ways, but it's also a multifunctional space for us. It's where we work, it's where we relax. It's, you know, it's suddenly having to perform way more things than it has before. So recognizing that even our physical environment is being stressed, you know, in terms of what it can do for us or what it can provide. So that's one thing. The other thing is recognizing that we all need to get really good at learning what de-stresses us, and carve out that time to do that. Whether that's, you know, going out for a walk, running, yoga, meditating, doing a hobby, you know, whatever it is, we mustn't, you know, now more than ever, I think we have to invest in that part of us a lot more than we've maybe made excuses for in the past, right? That's really important. So that's even all of those things before we even get to the conversation that we need to have. I think from a home life, it's about quality of those conversations and the exchanges. So, you know, being present with the people that we love in a way that is enriching and not banal, because one day can feel very much like the next. And so having markers that kind of create a shared experience, you know, in the absence of not having a different story to tell because we had a different day and we went in different directions, right? We've got to find a way to connect, have some exchange to connect, whether that's, you know, playing Scrabble or whatever, something that's a shared bond. In terms of work, I think we have a major challenge on our hands with everyone working remotely. I'm hearing a lot of, you know, screen fatigue, meeting fatigue. You know, they're saying, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm not doing I'm not expending much energy, I'm not physically active. You know, the most I do is walk to the kitchen and get myself a cup of tea and come back, right? For some people. It's very exhausting having back-to-back meetings online where you have to be still and in this box, and really hard to read people. So we're exerting energy on trying to understand what's going on in this meeting, what's the unspoken stuff that's going on in a very, very poor data environment, as in I can't see you, I'm not gauging your energy shifts, you're not actually shifting very much, so I can't tell if there's a change of energy in you. And so our conversation skills are really going to be put to the test, and how we meet and how frequently, how long our meetings are, or, you know, need to change. I'm a big advocate of, you know, look at those meetings, make them shorter, have more one-to-ones, invest in that time, use your coming together as a team meeting differently. Recognize the limits of some of these online tools for being able to, they're great for exchanging information and updates. They are rubbish at nurturing relationships and getting aligned on things and understanding one another. So don't have discussions on Slack. Don't, pick up the phone sometimes is better than a Zoom call, because you tune in differently. You've got things that we're not aware of, like breath and silences, and we're listening for a lot at a much deeper level to what someone is saying. So recognize, that we do have all these amazing tools, and they are brilliant at, sharing information, but for conversations they have their limits, and so important conversations should always be live, on the phone, Zoom, in person ideally where you can, and at the slightest hint of a disagreement, a misalignment, take it offline. Your immediate response to anything like that should be, hey, Kerry, let's chat after this about that. Move on, because it's really, really unhealthy. And we're not as in control of our culture and the the dynamics between us, and where we're all working remotely. Where relationships may degrade over time, they're going to degrade really fast over one exchange, especially if it was very public in front of the whole team. So there are many more obstacles, and as leaders especially, everyone's watching you to understand how you operate, how you respond to pressure. How are you when things are uncomfortable, or there's a lot of uncertainty, and they'll take their cue from you, guaranteed. And so we have to be much better in our conversations and think about them differently in a remote working environment.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't know how long this lockdown's going to continue for, right? And the impacts of us all shifting towards digital is having quite a profound impact on our relationships, I think, and therefore our communication. So if we wanted to have a difficult conversation, but yet we couldn't see that person face to face, or there was sort of barriers in our communication, what would you suggest how to approach that?
I would think about it in stages. That you initially want to put almost like a peace offering out, to say, look, I'm feeling some tension, and I'd like us to work better together. I have some thoughts, but I want to understand from you what would make a difference. And so, maybe we could start a conversation so that I can understand you better, or I can understand what's going on for you in your environment, or I can help you better. I think that initial piece puts the other person at ease, to know that, okay, still don't really like you, but I acknowledge the peace offering, and I acknowledge that you are wanting to make it work. So I'll give it a go, right? That's a really important place to get the other person to. Some people talk about it as small talk. And I'm uncomfortable with it and like to go, why can't I just be direct? Why can't I just say what's going on, and we cut to the chase and get on with the agenda? Because we all need to connect at the end of the day. We all, feed off a sense of belonging. So if that's absent, our job's a lot harder to influence somebody, or to understand them. So that peace offering is really, really important. And then don't expect it to happen or be resolved in one sitting. Again, keep your language clean, stick to facts as much as possible, be inviting, and when they say something that we still disagree with, we can still respond with something like, thank you for sharing that. It helps me understand. It's not saying you agree with them. It's just saying, okay, I understand a bit better, and I appreciate you made the effort to explain, what was going on for you. That there are two parts, certainly in a sort of feedback conversation or a difficult conversation that we have to have. There are two parts to a conversation within any sitting, and that's the initial alignment. I call it creative alignment, where we put out on the table everything that is pertinent to the dynamic. What's going on here? Why was a certain decision made? How I felt about it? What predicament that put me in? What stress I felt by being there? So everything on the table, so that you can start to sort through it and understand and relate to each other. And then, you want to reach towards the end of that conversation, what I call contracting. So find the things that you're aligned on, and and identify the things that still need further work. Okay, so in next time in an interaction, I'm going to be mindful of not cutting across you. What I'm going to try and do is actually either, invite you to speak more, or, build on your ideas. Or I'll, whatever it is, whatever that relationship is between you, but to be able to show that you are willing to make concessions, that you are more aware now that there has been something for you to learn, and that you are committed to the ongoing health of that relationship. And so, and contracting is also important if we want to create accountability. If you haven't had the conversation that says, okay, we're agreed, you're doing this and I'm doing this, and it doesn't happen, what do I have to come back to? I have nothing to come back to. And so, that creates an unhealthy dynamic. That's where you get someone in the team who is underperforming for a long time without it being dealt with. And because we haven't had that contracting, that didn't happen. So it's very hard to come back and say, well, we had that conversation and you said you were going to do, can you tell me why that didn't happen? You can't say that. You haven't got that hook. They do need to have structure in a workplace, less so in our personal relationships, but certainly, in a workplace environment, conversations should have structure. And there is a form and a flow, and there's a beginning and a middle and an end. If we don't do enough of the beginning, which is getting someone comfortable and setting the conversation up, the conversation can lose shape. And if you don't do the contracting at the end, then you haven't got something to come back to and build on later. And equally in the middle, if you don't do the exploration, you're not potentially surfacing the risks or the real issues, and instead because what we tend to do is jump to solution mode really quickly. You've got a problem, let me solve it, let me tell you what to do, which can be unhealthy as well.
What do you see in people that you've taken through this process? How have they transformed? Like, what sort of qualities and skills do they get at the end of it?
Certainly, I can say from the students who've been through my course, how transformational it's been and unexpected. I think what they learn is that there was so much they were missing before in their conversations, and they didn't feel confident about, that they can see now looking back. And they've got a greater commitment to being their best selves in the conversation, not just for themselves, but an appreciation for the other person, that what a difference that makes, because they've had the reward of someone sitting with someone, being with someone, holding that space for them, and watching that person's energy go from quite low to a really good positive place, and their sense of confidence. And when you watch someone in the space of 30 minutes, 45 minutes, go from feeling quite, drained and lost and confused and a bit overwhelmed to feeling like, okay, I know what I need to go and do next. That, there's no greater gift than being party or witness to that. And so I think once you've experienced that, you realize the richness that sits in waiting in conversations, and you are always going to be reaching for it. I've had people say that they not only do they feel more confident in conversations with people, and they're advocating for themselves more and for others, they feel like it's like the veil's been lifted. Now that they can see, they can't unsee it, and there is only one way to be for them, which is to be more present, to be a real thinking partner to somebody, a friend, a family member, to really listen and hold some silence for them, and truly, it has a calming effect. The oxytocin levels surge. It's a brilliant feeling that you feel more connected to other people, and that's what it is at the end of the day. The conversations are the pathway to that.
Fantastic. I think we'll leave it there, but thank you so much, Sehaam.
Oh, my pleasure, Kerry. It's been lovely.
Where can people find you online?
So my website is betterconversations.co. And there's actually a feedback conversations infographic that people can download. You do have to subscribe to my newsletter, but that's no bad thing. And so, all the links to other platforms are on there, but all the details of tips, videos, and support and so on are on there. So betterconversations.co.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kerry. It's been a pleasure.
Great.